A reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 9, verse 1 through 22. Now Saul, still breathing murderous threats against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, that if he should find any men or women who belonged to the way, he might bring them back to Jerusalem in chains. On his journey, as he was nearing Damascus, a light from the sky suddenly flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He said. "Who are you, sir?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, for they heard the voice, but could see no one. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him to Damascus. For 3 days he was unable to see, and he neither ate nor drank. There was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord said to him in a vision, "Ananias." He answered, "Here I am, Lord." The Lord said to him, "Get up and go to the street called Straight, and ask at the house of Judas for a man from Tarsus named Saul. He is there praying, and in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him, that he may regain his sight." But Ananias replied, "Lord, I have heard from many sources about this man, what evil things he has done to your holy ones in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priests to imprison all who would call upon your name." But the Lord said to him, "Go, for this man is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before Gentiles, kings, and Israelites, and I will show him what he will have to suffer for my name." So Ananias went and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, "Saul, my brother, the Lord has sent me, Jesus, who appeared to you on the way by which you came, that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, things like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. He got up and was baptized, and when he had eaten, he recovered his strength. He stayed some days with the disciples in Damascus, and he began at once to proclaim Jesus in the synagogues, that he is the Son of God. All who heard him were astounded and said, "Is not this the man who in Jerusalem ravaged those who call upon this name, and came here expressly to take them back in chains to the chief priests?" But Saul grew all the stronger and confounded the Jews who live in Damascus, proving that this is the Messiah. Here we hear about Saul, who encounters God on the road to Damascus and converts. He has an encounter with God. We also hear that God is with us when we suffer. Jesus says, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." Jesus is with us in the midst of our persecutions. And then we see the blindness that strikes Paul, and Ananias heals him, again because of a vision. And then we see this immediately, things like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. He got up and was baptized, and when he had eaten, he recovered his strength. So what do we see? We see baptism, and what is most likely the Eucharist. So Paul, who has a vision of Christ, goes through baptism. Paul, who has a vision of Christ, does what is very likely the Eucharist, receives the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. That we see that Paul, even though he had a vision, he still needed baptism. And there are those that claim that baptism is nothing. If baptism was nothing, why would Paul immediately be baptized? If baptism is nothing, why would this be how Paul is received into faith? And then we see that Paul, newly baptized, newly having met the Lord, he begins to preach. There are people who have been baptized, who have received communion, who have heard the preaching, who have heard much more preaching than Paul ever heard at that time. And yet, after years and years and decades, they do not preach. We refuse to tell people that Christ is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Messiah. We refuse to tell people that Jesus has fulfilled the prophecies. We refuse to tell people that Jesus has changed our lives. And so if we are refusing to tell people that Jesus has changed our lives, is it because we are afraid, or is it because we have not yet let Jesus change our lives? We have everything that Paul had and more. Why do we not preach?